The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien is the second part of the three-part Lord of the Rings. So, before I go any further with this summary or this episode, there's all the spoilers, just so you know. But in the Two Towers, the Fellowship has been separated, so Frodo and Sam are off to Mordor on their own to meet up with Gollum and try and take the ring to Mount Doom. And everyone else is either captured by orcs, pursuing the ones who were captured by orcs, dead, or surprisingly not dead. And there's battles and stuff. The end.
Welcome to the 20th episode of The Two Retired Homeschoolers. I'm Holly Matthews, joined by my co-host Rebecca.
Hi.
Today we have a special guest who, by some bizarre twist of fate, does not violate the trend of our guest being related to one of us. It turns out that somehow he and I are distantly related. And do you want to explain this?
Your third cousin twice removed is my second cousin once removed.
Yeah, he was not making that up. That is real. Okay, our Christian Jewish guest would like you to know that he does not speak Latin and is also a retired homeschooler. He has an associate's in arts, specifically with teaching. He enjoys gardening, cartography, and sometimes, in his own words, writes bad poetry. You can find numerous well-written essays on his blog, Echoes of the Republic. And with that, I would like to formally welcome Itzhak Vogel to the podcast.
Welcome!
Thank you for having me.
We'll probably refer to him as Isaac, but Yitzhak is the Jewish pronunciation. Okay, so first impressions. Rebecca, would you like to start?
Okay, so this is not my first time reading this book, but I feel about the same way about it every time, which is that I really like it.
All right, and Isaac, would you like to give your first impressions?
Yeah, I've read it a lot over the years, not recently, but it always strikes me that the beginning is very slow. When Legolas and Aragorn and Gimli are running across Rohan, and it's 50 pages. I don't think that's an exaggeration. It might be.
Sure, I'll check.
But then we get Helm's Deep, and we get the Ents marching to war, and then it slows down again, just in relation when we get to the Hobbits again. But it's not boring if you're immersed. It's just slow.
Yeah.
It's definitely not 15 pages until they meet the riders of Rohan, but it might be if you add up everything afterward until they meet Gandalf.
It was very long, regardless.
No, it was 5 pages until they met the riders of Rohan, and they talked to them for a while. But it might be what comes after that, which I think is longer.
I'm including Boromir's funeral and all that. That's my problem.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Which should be at the end of the first book.
He said that should have been the end of the first book, which actually kind of makes sense.
At least the death of Boromir. Right, the death of Boromir, something like that, should have been at the end of the first book, not the beginning of the second one.
That's how they do it in the movies.
Yeah, that was a good move. But then Tolkien wrote it all as one book, didn't he? And the publishers split it up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he wrote it all as one book and they split it up. But he did choose to put it at the beginning of, he separated it into 6 parts. So he did choose to put it at the beginning of part 3, not at the end of part 2.
That's true.
The whole thing of ending a story on a death, though, I feel like is a little overdone, so I'm not, super mad about it.
Yeah, well, and I think probably his rationale was, the important thing here is that the Fellowship is broken, and what, the central storyline is Frodo and Sam. So to end it with Frodo and Sam going off to Mordor does make sense.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything to say except that Tolkien is boring, Isaac?
I didn't say that. I said he has scenes that are slow, but he makes up for it with the lore, and maybe they're supposed to be slow because they were slow for the people there.
Right.
Nice.
Holly, why do you say everything is nice?
Because I'm trying to be cool, Rebecca. Stop running it.
It was actually your first time reading it.
It was.
Are you still
Indeed.
impressed with Tolkien?
Yes. And actually, interestingly enough, even though Tolkien wrote this as one book, I don't know, it had a different feel to it. And maybe that's just a psychological thing because I read it a little later and it like is in separate binding, but I don't know, maybe it's just the story as well. I will say, okay, to go through all my different points, it increased my respect for the movies and that like the movies were so true to the book. They really did not veer off very much at all. And when they did exclude stuff, it was well done to where the story was very holistic and like they had good reasons for cutting things out because they're trying to turn a 19-hour read into a 2-hour movie. So yeah, I knew I loved the movies already, but reading the books made me appreciate them so much more, which is a different reaction than a lot of people have because some people read the books and they're like, oh, this is so much better than the movies. The movies are trash, which is definitely not true. I will say I did like the first book better. Part of that is the intro of the Shire because I am absolutely in love with the Shire. And it just had a lot more lighthearted feel to it, which, you know, I like lighthearted things.
Yeah, this is definitely like the most intense and not Shire-ish book.
Yeah.
I think my favorite chapter, well, my favorite chapter is probably with the Ents, but one of my favorite chapters is Flotsam and Jetsam, where they like Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn meet up with Merry and Pippin again in the ruin of Isengard, and they all just literally sit down for an entire chapter and smoke pipes and eat food and like tease each other and tell each other what's been going on. Like it's so
Yeah.
wholesome and Shire-like, even though it's way off in Isengard.
I like that. Gimli and Legolas are doing that throughout the whole book to each other.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, like the random part in the Two Towers where Gimli just starts talking about caves for a really long time. And it's like, I guess Tolkien was in a mood when he wrote this. It was shockingly long.
I love that part. I also love how when they're in like the one situation in like the trees or something, Legolas is just like enamored of these insane trees. He's never seen like awake trees like this before. And he's like, thinks it's so cool. And Gimli is like, this is so creepy. Let's get out of here. But he's like, but you comfort me, Legolas. I'm glad you're here and that I'm like safe with you and you at least are getting pleasure out of this. And then there's like a parallel thing, which I can't remember what situation that was, but they were somewhere.
It was the caves where
It was in the
Legolas
caves? Okay.
was like, oh, I don't care about caves. And then Gimli was like, no, no, no. It goes into a really long dissertation of why caves are amazing. And then Legolas is like, well, that's nice.
But yeah, I love his description of the caves though. Like you can picture what cool formations there are in there.
Yes, if you all are wondering, she is indeed getting a degree in geology, so. Okay, so again, I like the first book better, and I was actually expecting to not like this book as much because, again, the movies are pretty true to the books, and I did not really like the second movie. It's not a bad movie, I just do not enjoy it. It's not something I would like sit down and watch for pleasure.
Definitely my favorite of the movies.
Yeah, and every single person I've talked to says the same thing.
Wait,
Do
really?
you think that, Isaac? Yes. Yes.
Yes, because of the Ents, Treebeard.
Okay, well, and see, that's a good reason, but...
And Helm's Deep.
Okay, so I also found this book a little boring. Actually, not a little boring. I just kind of found it, like, a lot boring in certain parts, but not all of it was boring. I definitely found it more boring than the first book. And the thing about Lord of the Rings is it's pretty slow moving, but it, and this is a pun because I mean it literally as well, it covers a lot of ground. It's just a lot of traveling. And so it's weird because it's like this chapter just drags on forever, but then once you're done with the chapter, you're like, oh wow, a lot of stuff happened. Why was this? And boring is kind of a harsh word. And I also agree with Isaac in that I feel like you just need to be in the right frame of mind, in the right place and time to fully enjoy it. And so I was imagining myself like maybe in my 30s and during a rainy day with a cold cup of tea and being like, ah, yes, this is wonderful. Again, I was blown away by the vivid and thorough descriptions. The world building, of course, Tolkien is an expert at that. And even though his descriptions, by my standards, are far too long and far too geography focused, it's still just like, dang, this is literally incredible. Well, and I'm sure Isaac disagrees as well because he's into cartography. Oh my gosh. Map making! So, yeah, what did you think about the geography aspects?
I do not like Middle Earth map. Mountains make no sense. That's the only complaint.
So
In terms
basically
of
he agrees with
geography.
me.
I don't know about that.
You should read The Silmarillion, Isaac. There's a chapter that's literally just an entire chapter describing geography. You can make like a map of the chapter and save us all some time.
Okay, so I also loved the creativity of the Ents, wrong treasure, and also the Entwives. Like the part where Tolkien was like, "Yeah, we lost all our wives. We're not really sure where they went," and then Pippin or Merry was like, "Oh, we're so sorry that they died." And he's like, "No, they didn't die. We just lost them." And then they have all these poems and songs about how they're trying to be reunited with the Entwives, and it was just so darling.
You thought that was funny? That's sad.
Well, we don't know. Maybe the Entwives are living their best life away from Mordor. Oh, and also, to wrap up my first impressions, probably the most I got out of this book was the consistent examples of characters doing the best with what they had. Like, in situations where 90% of the things happening were out of their control, like, the way they handled the 10% was like, wow, that's crazy. And to give some examples, like the tension that Frodo was experiencing when like he felt like he was betraying Gollum, but he also had to stay within the good favor of Faramir, like that was solid. And I felt so sorry for Frodo, and he's such a good soul. And also like Gandalf leaving the battle before it even started, at one point in the book, that was also a rough decision. And Faramir deciding to befriend Frodo, even though like he had a law to uphold in his country. And also Sam going on without Frodo after he was convinced he was dead. So those are just a few examples, but they really showed character, and I got a lot out of them.
You want me to tell you one of my first impressions that I had when I first read this book?
Yeah!
I thought Frodo actually died.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because I was just reading it and I was like, whoa, wait, what? Wait, for real? And then there's the line about how I was like, nah. But then there's the line where, and that more than anything, convinced Sam that Frodo actually was dead. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's only the end of the second book, and I guess Sam's the main character now.
You know, as I was reading it this time, I was like, wow, I wonder if I hadn't seen the movies and I actually thought that Frodo was dead. That would be crazy. I do remember having that thought. So that's interesting that you actually did experience that.
Why you should always read the book first.
I also wonder if part of the reason why the book was a bit boring to me is because I had seen the movie, and like, even though Tolkien is really good at descriptions and all, you really need the intrigue of the plot to, I don't know, entice your brain into like engaging, I guess. And I knew what was going to happen because the movie really stuck to the plot of the book, on this book specifically. There was no Tom Bombadil, it left out, so it was like, yeah.
Right. As if anyone cares about, like, I guess some people care about Tom Bombadil, but...
Both of us care about Tom Bombadil, Rebecca. You are outnumbered.
This definitely was the book that the movie stuck to the closest, except for, like, Faramir at the end, which is, like, one of the biggest deviations that it's bad, but, you know. Other than that, it stuck really close.
We can go into themes now. Who wants to start?
Isaac can start. Okay, I'll start, guys. I'm gonna completely butcher this. But, something that I thought was really interesting in this book, actually I've thought of this before, but I was particularly noticing it reading it this time. Actually, no. We're going to start this by going into what I said about how the movie changed Faramir. And I'm going to sound like every other Lord of the Rings fan who's read the books, but I don't care because it's true. The movie ruined Faramir, and it was a dumb decision. A completely and utterly dumb decision. Because Faramir is such a cool character in the books. Like the way he's described as similar to Boromir but also different, and he's very like, I don't know, he's like not a person you would be comfortable around in real life cuz he's just kind of grim and serious um and like a really good person and also a really competent person. So you just feel completely like intimidated by him, and you'd feel like you should probably just shut your mouth because you're Sam and you have no idea what's going on. And you're just like not even in the same class. But anyway, he's a really cool character though. And he's like, okay, through the whole book, especially this book, Tolkien is exploring like these different reactions to power, the use of power, and the temptation of power. You have it with Saruman. You have not just like what Saruman has come to, but you have like what the eventual cost is for him of deciding to pursue knowledge. I mean, deciding to pursue power instead of knowledge and friendship like he used to do. And then you have like him talking with Gandalf and how the lust for power sort of messed up his mind, and how he's thinking in all these twisted ways, and how he won't even save himself when he has a chance because of how it's just completely warped his thinking. And then you also have Gollum, who had the ring, which is like temptation to dominate other people's wills personified. And like Gollum had the ring forever and ever, now he doesn't have it, so he wants to get it back, and it's this all-consuming lust. And his relationship of trying to, he has little like sparks of just being a normal creature and not just like a complete slave to the ring. Like he is his own individual, but it dominates him in this way, and it just completely ruins him. And then you have Frodo, who changes subtly over the second half of the book. Like, yeah, he's still Frodo, and he's very single-mindedly focused on getting the ring to the mountain to destroy it. But there's several times when Sam notices Frodo talk in a way that's like stern or remote, or he has this like hidden power in the way he's talking. And so I don't know if that's supposed to be like Frodo's not using the ring, but it's sort of getting to him, or if it's like because he has the ring and chooses not to use it, he still has this certain power. It's very interesting. His mind has definitely been strengthened, but also weakened by his experience to this point. Which you see when he like struggles to disobey, like to not put the ring on at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring when the eye wants him to, and Gandalf is like, no, don't do it. Take the ring off, you fool. And then he like decides to take the ring off. But then there's also the moment in the Two Towers when they're like crossing past the place where the Nazgul live, and
Yeah.
and the thing stops, and its will wants him to put the ring on, but his mind at this point is strong enough that he knows, no, there's nothing in my will answering, yeah, maybe I should do that. And so it's just interesting that that's going on with Frodo. And then you have Faramir, and he's yet another. Well, okay, before I go on to Faramir, you have, for instance, Gandalf, who is glad that the ring has passed beyond his power to be tempted to use it. And then you have Faramir, who has not owned the ring, does not want to own the ring, and is not like in Frodo's position of being stuck with it, and he can't do anything about it unless he succumbs to it. So he's really interesting as the character who has the strength to just say no. Like, he's the character, because earlier you had Boromir, his brother, was the one who succumbed to the temptation and tried to take it from Frodo. Faramir even though he has all the same temptations that Boromir did, and perhaps even more so as things have gotten more and more desperate since then, he takes the path with temptation and power of saying, get it away from me where I'm going to choose to remove myself and have you remove yourself so that I'm not tempted past this point. I'm not going to take it, and I'm also not going to stick around where I would be tempted to take it. And he sees very clearly what the consequences would be of him taking it. So he's this really strong, wise character, and he's really cool and really human. And then, in the movies, they have him be like, nah, I'm going to take you to my dad, because we need this. I got it. Okay, one of the things that happens in the book when they meet Faramir is it's the law that he has to, either kill or take for judgment to his father, the steward in Gondor, anyone found trespassing in the woods of Ithilien without Gondor's permission. So they find Sam and Frodo doing that, because they're just trying to get into Mordor. And so he, has to think it through, make the judgment, basically put his own self on the line to let Frodo and Sam go on with their errand, because he figures out how important it is. In the movie, you just completely erase all that part of his character, because he's like, no, this is what I have to do. I have to take you to my dad. And I get that, he wants his dad's approval really badly, and he wants his dad to like him as much as he liked Boromir. And that's also present in the books, but in the books you're able to show that without having to assassinate the other parts of his character. So the movie, I understand, is just trying to, illustrate that Faramir has daddy issues, but they chose to do it by negating one of the most important parts of his character. And so you don't have the full exploration of temptation and power that Tolkien gave you in the book. You completely, cut out this whole important facet of it by not having this specific character, because all you have are characters who in one way or another succumb to the ring in the movie. So you've completely taken out the part of one who makes a different choice. And that's super important to the whole just thematic exploration of the book. And when you cut it out of the movie, not only does it ruin Faramir's character, when Faramir is one of the best characters, it also reduces the moral depth and interestingness of your story. And that's my TED Talk. Thank you for coming.
That's very interesting. I was just thinking the other day about different types of self-control and how if you lack self-control when faced with temptation, there is another type of self-control that hopefully you have to be able to say, okay, I lack self-control in this area. Maybe I can just remove the temptation or remove myself from the temptation. And I don't think it's any less honorable or requires any less strength than when you are faced with temptation and saying no.
I agree with that so much. That's what people need to understand and do, is remove themselves from temptation. Because Tolkien makes that exact point in the book. All these people, they know if they just live with this temptation on and on, they can't overcome it on their own. Frodo can't, literally can't. He's just stuck in this unfortunate situation where he can't get away from it. So all the wise people, all the people who have self-control, that's exactly what they do. They remove themselves from where they will be tempted. Did Holly just run out and leave while I was talking?
I can hear her. I have to get a charger.
She says she can hear you, but she needs a charger. I didn't think of this before, but the way you describe it reminds me of this concept we have in Hebrew called the Yetzer Hara. And that means evil inclination is the literal translation. It comes from Genesis, the Noah flood narrative. The imagination of the heart of man is to do evil. And so essentially the Yetzer Hara is temptation. And I just never thought of the ring. I thought of the ring as the temptation to use power, but not as temptation in general. The best way you avoid the Yetzer Hara is you avoid temptation, you avoid even the appearance of evil, the opportunity of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it also takes a lot of, what's the word? Self-awareness. That was difficult. But yes, it seemed there was one line where Faramir said something about like, oh, this would bring me great honor if I were to like, I think the word honor was used to bring this back to the kingdom, something like that. And then the movie just kind of took that and ran with it.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, wasn't he being sarcastic? He was like, "Oh yeah, this would bring me so much honor. I have these two little guests in my home they're completely in my power. Just overpower them and take their thing. So honorable." I thought he was being sarcastic. That's hilarious. That the movie, if you just like imagine the scriptwriter being like, "Oh yeah, oh it would bring me great honor. Oh, motivation for Faramir. Okay."
What did you think, Isaac? It didn't strike me as sarcastic.
Well,
I thought it was sarcastic, but
Okay.
They didn't just ruin him for this book. They ruined him for the next one too.
exactly. Cause yeah.
I will say, though, the actor who did play Faramir, for the role he was given, I think he did a good job, like, sort of reconciling him with the Faramir in the book, despite all his lines, because he just, like, you could tell he had such a good heart, you know?
Yeah, it was a good actor.
Yeah, I agree. He's a good actor.
It's the writer and the director.
Yeah.
Yep. But I also really like how it kind of mirrors the scene with Galadriel when Sam accidentally gives it away that it's the ring. And then Faramir is like, huh, what a wonderful chance, These hobbits, like, he does the same thing where he, like, scares them. Interesting. Imagine if, instead of what they did with Faramir, the movie writers had decided to do another little Galadriel thing with Faramir, where he just suddenly went, like, green and black and wavy and said, "And I would be a queen, beautiful and terrible as the morning."
That was so odd. I remember that creeping me out as a kid.
And Bilbo going for the ring too.
Oh yeah, that was creepy too. But yes, I really liked your point about how different people struggle with the temptation of power, and those different illustrations, because Faramir definitely did a good job. Also, do you guys agree that scene where Frodo is like feeling so bad because Faramir needs to capture Gollum, but Frodo doesn't want Gollum to think that he's betraying him, but he really is acting in the best interest?
When I tell you that the first time I read this book, at that point, my heart broke. Like, I hate that scene.
Literally, it is the worst.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad you feel the same way, because it was like, oh my gosh, I can't. Okay.
So I really like the part about the Ents and Isengard. And Isengard in the beginning, at least in the first book, is described as this place of, gardens. And then when we come back to it, it's like barren rock and hewn wood stumps, steam coming out. And so Treebeard, when he talks about Saruman, he says he has a mind of wheels and metal. He doesn't care for growing things except as they serve him. Saruman reminds me of like the Enlightenment industrialist kind of humanist mind, because at that time they were making all these scientific discoveries, but they weren't doing it for the sake of knowing. They were trying to understand the world so that they could manipulate it to their own devices, and that's the essence of what the machine is. They're trying to.
Yeah, and then maybe you pair that with Darwinism, and so they're trying to manipulate the world for their own ends and then also evolve past nature and all the unimportant stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
So Tolkien, we mentioned in the last episode he was born in South Africa, and that's true, but he was raised for the most part in this village called Sarahole, and he later moved to Birmingham, but if you know English geography, this village is literally in Birmingham now.
Which I don't, because I thought Birmingham was in Alabama.
Yeah. So Birmingham is this it's the industrial heart, at least of the Midlands, possibly all of England, except London.
But what about like Manchester and stuff?
Yeah, Manchester's a big one too.
But that's in the north, right? Keep going.
Right. Birmingham is at least the industrial heart of the Midlands. And so that city just entirely ate up his rural village that he grew up in. So you can see where he got this idea of seeing industry and nature at odds and favoring the nature.
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of a wish fulfillment. He had the trees, the Ents, rebelling and destroying the industrial heart.
Yeah. And it's really awesome, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the best part in the book.
It is. It is.
And I love the Ent chant. I didn't write it down, but...
We go to war with something.
Oh,
yeah.
yes. I love that.
I love everything about the Ents. I love that they don't want to be hasty, that their words for things are the stories of the things, and so their language takes forever to say anything in. I love that they have like wells of eyes that it sort of have their history in them, and also that they just like, I think it's wish fulfillment-y for me that like they're older, they're like as old as, they're like geologically old. Like they're as old as some of the geological formations in Middle-earth. They've been around for so long, they've seen like so much stuff, and so they just live in these like primeval forests. They've been around since like they've just been around forever. Like they're like living primary sources about natural history.
That reminded me of another point.
Go on.
Gandalf called Fangorn, that's Treebeard. Gandalf called Fangorn. What's the forest called?
Fangorn?
Fangorn, yeah.
Treebeard, he called him the oldest living thing on Middle Earth, I believe.
Yes.
So he's like the embodiment of creation in a way.
Yeah. It's so cool to think about, right? Like a living thing that has memory of history. That much is like, what? It's so cool.
Did you find any significance in the fact that Saruman overlooked the Ents when he was like taking into account all their possible enemies, and then the Ents turned out to be one of the most powerful forces?
Absolutely.
Like, what do you think the analogy is for real life, since Tolkien was so much against innovation and all that?
And analogy.
Yeah.
No, like, just the obvious that, like, he disregarded what he thought couldn't serve him and forgot that it could have its own power, usefulness, potency that was not related to anything that he cared about, that it could still be a threat to him. Like, just like anyone who just wantonly destroys nature for money or progress, it's like you think this isn't going to come back to bite you, but it is. Maybe not you, but your descendants, right? Like, I don't know, just to me it had the obvious significance that he didn't care about nature, therefore he disregarded it, and it was more powerful than he thought it was. And it just kind of makes sense that that's how it would be.
And it was his responsibility to take care of the nature.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, Radagast isn't in these books at all. I think he's mentioned, but you can see him compared to Radagast. Like Saruman only learned about things so that he could figure out how to use them.
Yeah.
In Radagast, he was the complete opposite. He didn't care about learning things so much. He just wanted to tend the garden.
Therefore, Gandalf was the only actually useful wizard in the situation. Because he hit the middle ground.
Yeah, I always thought that perhaps Tolkien's view of technology was a bit... dramatic is not the right word, but like, technology is like money. It's like it can be used for good or evil. But it's almost like Tolkien seemed to think that it just was evil. But this is kind of what we were talking about in the first episode, where we were saying, well, no wonder he thought that, because he was only seeing it used for evil during the war.
And I definitely think he knew it could be used for good purposes. Like, as someone was reminding me, he used a typewriter. He had like a tape recorder, but he used technology and realized that it could be used for good purposes. It's just that he saw so much of it being used for bad purposes that that's what he was going to focus on,
Yeah.
And it can be used for such bad purposes that it's worthwhile writing something that's a sort of it's just a fantasy book, but it's definitely, if you think about it.
Yeah, maybe he subconsciously slipped in some messages and his story meant only to be a good story.
And also the destruction of nature. It's not just about, like, the the bad things you can use technology for. It's also just how awful it is to destroy nature like that. Like, and you can't get it back. There's there's these old forests that have never been touched, and as they shrink and shrink, there will never be forests that have been around since the mountains were formed in Middle Earth again. Like, it's like in Missouri, even. You know, you think about the fact that, what do we have, like 0.01% of the prairie left? Like, yeah, I'm not saying it's bad to use the land for cows and crops and homes and stuff, but like, we've lost the prairie, you know? We don't have the prairie. There's a lot of species that are gone. So you just have something, and yeah, you may decide that it's worth losing to get what you'll get in return, but a lot of people don't even do the cost benefit analysis, you know? They just destroy nature because that's the thing to do, and then it's like, oh, now you don't have this thing anymore and you can't get it back. And that's the same thing in Middle Earth, like, except that in Middle Earth, some people kind of realize that as they're doing it. Like, the elves are like, yeah, we're losing Middle Earth. All the, like, cool places that we have, they're not gonna last forever after this war. It's pretty much done for, whether we win or lose. So I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that tangent, except that, like, I think Tolkien is equally. I think he is a raging environmentalist. Not really.
But it is like we've turned our dominion over the earth into a tyranny over the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's forsaking our primary duty that was given us in Gan Eden and
his
the
garden
of Eden. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just me, but I get this real subtle, real profound joy when I feed an animal, or you feel the dirt under your fingernails when you're gardening, when you water the garden. And
Yeah.
nothing else does that.
Can I just point out that Isaac is such a hobbit? It's so accurate. Like, he loves maps and books and gardens and tea.
And he knows all the genealogy, all the obscure genealogy, like how you guys are related.
But I hum like Treebeard. I don't speak too hasty.
That's awesome.
Oh, and at the end, who was it when Treebeard was addressing another character? It may have been Gandalf, and he was like, well, for one so hasty, who sure has a bit of wisdom or is able to think things through. I forget who it was, but I remember loving that part.
And he said, once he talked to Gandalf, the hobbits didn't seem so hasty anymore.
Yes.
Yes.
That's right. That's
well,
right.
You were not such hasty folk as I thought. You said much less than you might have and know more than you should.
Are you guys familiar with Christopher Nolan's movies? Have you watched Oppenheimer, by the way? I know you're really into history, and that just came out. No. You haven't?
No.
Okay.
That name, not Oppenheimer, the first name.
Christopher Nolan?
Yeah.
Okay, to name off a few of his, like, super famous ones. Interstellar, The Dark Knight. What is the one about dreams? Inception. Yeah, The Prestige.
Okay, I've heard of these movies. I've watched none of them.
Same, Isaac.
Okay, well, we'll throw out that point then. I was just gonna, like, bring up the fact. I was using Christopher Nolan's movies as an example of having darkness that may be unnecessary. And I was trying to think of a better word than darkness when I was coming up with this theme. And I really couldn't. So we'll just go with that. So I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts about the dark, brooding, moody nature of this book in particular, as opposed to the other ones. And I also wanted to discuss, like, what you guys thought of darkness in general. Like, does it need to be justified? What are some good examples and bad examples of darkness used in art, like movies and books? And if it does need to be justified, for instance, to show good versus evil, like, where is the line? And do you think there's such a thing as, like, using it cheaply and artificially as just an intrigue factor? And also, how do we feel about how Tolkien made use of this? And, like, for me personally, I'm leaning towards the idea that, like, it was a bit too intense with not enough relief, and it almost lost some of its impact for me personally, just because, like, if there had been more relief spread throughout the book, like, the really dark parts would have stood out to me more. So, yeah, what are your guys' thoughts? That was a lot, I know.
I don't agree.
I was like, I needed to be taking notes so I didn't lose track of all the questions.
So you don't agree? Why is that?
I don't even agree that there weren't less dark parts peppered in. Like, in the middle of the book, we have the victory at Helm's Deep and the Ents marching on Isengard. There's less in the second half of the book with Frodo and Sam going.
She'll still have the respite of walking in Ithilien, where the woods are still beautiful, meeting up with Faramir, and receiving help unlooked for from that quarter.
Yeah, but there's always this foreboding aspect to everything, and maybe that's just Tolkien's way of building it up very, very slowly to the climax of Mordor and all that. But it's still just, it feels unusually heavy to me.
It's a very dark time, and in dark times you have to look to the little things that aren't dark. If that makes sense.
A good example of this is when I was watching the second movie, like to bring this back to the movies, and the part where, and this would be the third movie actually, where Sam starts talking about, like, do you remember the taste of strawberries and all these wonderful things about the Shire? And I remember that moment, I was like, this is so beautiful. Like the relief at this part, and then right before, especially it being about, you know, them finally dropping the ring into the fire. Again, spoilers. It was just, like, that was so significant to me, but I don't think it would have made that impact if we hadn't had that moment where there was just reflecting on good things.
I definitely agree with that sentiment. I think it all comes down to how something personally affects you, because that's what I thought about the third movie, was that it was too dark, unrelentingly, just doom and gloom and foreboding and stuff, and so it was just like I got kind of numb, and all the power of the book was of the story was kind of lost on me. Whereas with the Two Towers, I definitely don't feel that way at all. Two Towers is one of the most emotionally impactful books I've ever read. Like, books very rarely have an emotional impact on me. Like, if a book makes me, like, feel something strong enough that I notice I'm feeling it, that's, like, super rare, and I'm like, what did this book just do? And The Two Towers is one of the books that does that for me at several different moments. For me, there's enough, kind of like what Isaac was saying. I was agreeing with what you were saying, Isaac. As far as, for me, like, there's a lot of, again, there's all those moments, like the victory at Helm's Deep, the Isengard, the Ents marching on Isengard and Faramir and all that stuff. But there's those moments, and then there's also just plenty of jokes, plenty of moments with one character teasing another character. I love the part where Merry and Pippin are walking into the woods after they've escaped from the Ents, and they're just like, you know, they just went through this, like, traumatic experience, and they're like, oh, well, I haven't been making myself very useful, have I? But now it's my time to shine, because I looked at the maps when we were in Rivendell. And just, like, their unquenchable hobbit cheerfulness. There's just enough lightness in the book. Like, it does not feel overwhelming to me at all. And the dark moments, such as Gollum in the pool when Frodo has to trick him, and also on the stair when he, like, feels bad and then Sam wakes up and completely alienates him. Those hit me super hard, actually. And yeah. So that's just not how I experienced it, but how you experienced it is how you experienced it. Like, you can't argue with that, you know?
Yeah. And I will say that Tolkien did a much better job with the build-up. And also, again, like, this is a book about good versus evil. And so, like, I can see the worth in it. But especially, like, most modern movies with a large budget, I've noticed, tend to have, like, a very dark feel to it. Or they'll literally put, like, filters on the movie that make it look like gray or blue or something. And it's like, yeah, this just looks kind of sickly to me.
I am normally really sensitive to that. There's a lot of stories that a lot of people like that I'm just like, yeah, I can't even, I'm not even, like, it's so numbing within like 10 minutes of all the darkness of like how it's presented or just the content matter. It's like, I don't feel anything anymore. This doesn't feel like a story. It feels like a wallow.
Well, it's cheap. That's what it is. It's using it to draw you in, but there's nothing, like I said earlier, to like justify it. But I'm wondering, okay, well, what does justify darkness?
I think one of the uses of darkness in fiction that people overlook because they're like, well, to show good versus evil, which, yeah. But I think one of the main reasons that, as like, one of the main arguments I would give for why there should be darkness in fiction, not all fiction, but sometimes, is that it makes people take the other side of the coin more seriously. So, like, Lord of the Rings is a book that is like, has a lot of dark stuff in it, also has like really beautiful stuff and really hopeful stuff in it. It's a very uplifting book in some respects. But if you just had a book that was only like about a homecoming in a shire and some hobbits and some elves and some beautiful trees, do you think it would affect you like people anything like Lord of the Rings affects them? No, because no one would take it seriously. You would read it and you'd be like, that's nice, but like it doesn't feel super real. And I think the real point of darkness is just to be relatable. Like you you have seen or experienced or both stuff in the world in your life. And so to see it like worked through and like in fiction form and like where and like I can't talk, but like where people there's a sort of a solution to it, even though it's a narrative solution, not a logical solution. It's just super cathartic, especially if you specifically relate to the certain types of evil that are being dealt with in the book. That's what I think.
Yes, my sister and I, we were talking about this the other day, how like people who work with crime and like dealing with the after effects of evil and trying to clean it up, like it takes great strength to be able to compartmentalize that and say like, okay, evil is a part of life, but it's not all of life. And sometimes like for me and you and I have discussed this quite a bit, Rebecca, like researching the Holocaust and stuff. It used to really affect me and like I would view the world almost through these glasses that I've now put on because of like the things I've learned. And like now everything is tainted by these glasses. And everything just looks unusually dark and I can't enjoy anything as much as I used to. And it takes great strength to be like, okay, this is a very real part of life, but that's all it is. It's a part of life. Even like really horrific stuff, like the experiments they did on people. Like, and you can't even imagine, like, if you experienced that, how on earth would you be able to live a normal life again? And so, and it's crazy to me, after Pippin and Merry were taken by the orcs, and they basically experienced straight up trauma. Afterwards, they were like, wow, that was crazy. But they were able to kind of move on and then enjoy the ends and like have a happy life in the Shire after it was all over. And it was like, wow, that's like something special that it's like you need an attachment to the truth to be able to arrive at that level. Okay, what do you guys think? Do you think that darkness needs to be justified? And if so, how?
I think it needs to be justified. Since darkness is inherently bad, you shouldn't, there would never, you would never just include it to include it. There should always be a reason, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I agree. It shouldn't be like glorified.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing.
But I don't think it inherently makes a story worse by being present in the story. You have to take into context
Right.
what it's doing in the story.
What was your favorite character?
Treebeard.
Oh, good. Good choice.
What was yours, Rebecca?
Oh, I mean, Mary's like one of my favorite characters. Treebeard's also one of my favorite characters. Yeah, we have a guest on this podcast, and we need to know a little bit more about how he felt about Lord of the Rings. So I have a couple questions. The first one is, what do you think the two towers are? Which towers are they?
It's the tower. I forget the name of it. The tower in Isengard. Orthanc.
So there
Orthanc, I
is name.
think. and the Dark Tower, in Mordor.
Wait, so like the Dark Tower, like where Sauron sits and the eye is, or like the tower where there's the tunnel that Shelob is in? That relates to the darkness. Shelob is super dark.
Oh yeah.
I also love how they just like pull out the Galadriel's light in that part of the story. That's super random, but that reminded me of that. There's that tower that they like are sneaking through, and then there's also the Dark Tower, and then there's also the two towers that they guard that guard the Black Gate, right? That they can't get through. And then there's the tower at Minas Morgul, with the creepy undead things watching, and the veil where the flowers glow white. And then there's also, like you said, Saruman's tower. So that's like way more than two. So I'm just saying, which two towers do you, like, I'm for sure we're gonna say Saruman's tower is one of the towers. But which one is the other tower?
I just always assumed it was Sauron's. But then, is Sauron's tower even in the book? I know it doesn't describe the eye on top.
I don't think it is in the book. Like, I think the closest is like when Pippin looks into Palantir and like talks to him. He's probably looking into the Dark Tower. Oh well, I guess the answer is we still don't know. Oh, other question. Who's your least favorite character?
Oh, that's a harder question. I mean, naturally, one doesn't like, what's his name?
Gollum.
No, you love Gollum.
I don't like Gollum.
You love Gollum?
You said in the last one that Gollum is your favorite character. First of all.
I did not!
Oh, okay.
Putting words in my mouth.
I think Gollum's a very fascinating
No, Gollum creeps me out.
Okay. The spy that Saruman sent to Rohan. I forget his name. Wormtongue.
Oh,
I was thinking Forked Tongue.
Forked tongue.
Oh, well, that was another one of his names.
No, keep your forked tongue behind your teeth. That's what Gandalf said to him.
That's a good
That's a very good, yeah.
But it's like he's written to be unlikable. So is that fair?
Yeah, that's okay, do you have an unpopular least favorite character? Like a character that you think other people love, but you don't like this character?
Frodo. Yeah.
Oh!
Frodo doesn't have a lot of character to me.
That.
What do you mean Frodo doesn't have a lot of character?
I don't connect with him.
That doesn't mean he doesn't have character just because you aren't the same.
Right. That's fair.
You did ask for an unpopular opinion, Rebecca.
Okay, well, you delivered, Isaac. I don't know how unpopular it is. I have heard people say they don't like Frodo before.
I mean, I agree that Frodo isn't, like, bubbling over with personality.
He's carrying.
It's almost like goodness.
Do you want him to be over here dancing for joy in the meadows? That's not how it works.
But it's literally just like, Frodo is good. Goodness is Frodo's personality. Like, and goodness is, like, a good personality, but it's, like, not really a personality, if that makes sense.
He can be really harsh, though. Even before he had the ring.
Oh, that's
true. He had a harsh
true.
side to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not agree that his personality is goodness at all. Like, he has a very distinct personality. Like, can you guys not read? I don't understand.
Oh, I have a good question. Do you think Gollum is more cute or creepy?
Gollum is creepy. Smeagol is cute.
Smeagol's creepy too.
Do you think the entity that encapsulates both Gollum and Smeagol is more creepy or cute?
Creepy, yeah.
Okay. I remember as a kid watching Gollum being like, oh, I want to like him, those cute big eyes, but man, I can't look at him.
That is really funny. But think about this. Smeagol killed another hobbit just because he wanted a little shiny thing. I don't care how
Right.
much he capers around and says, nice master, nice master. He's creepy.
So you agree with Sam?
Slinker and Stinker.
Yeah, we need to talk about Sam's verbal abusement of Gollum, because Sam is just constantly, like, insulting Gollum to his face and saying the worst things about him.
And making fun of the way he talks.
Yeah, like, Sam is legitimately not good to Gollum, and Gollum, like has his faults for sure, but it's like, you don't stoop to another's level.
He was right to be suspicious, obviously.
Yeah, but
he wasn't right to treat him quite the way that he did. But it's very understandable that he did. I actually wrote like a whole sort of thing about this once. Basically about Sam's imperfection and the contrast between how he treats Gollum and how Frodo treats Gollum. I think that's really interesting that Sam is like one of the most pure characters in the whole thing, but he still has his flaws and prejudices. He's definitely like that kind of narrow-minded, like wonderful, wonderful, narrow-minded country yokel who's like, like, he's a great person, but he doesn't have necessarily a whole lot of grace for someone who has stepped out of what he considers the appropriate path. Like, not that, like, Gollum has done far worse than step out of the appropriate path in life, but he's still a creature with a soul, I guess you could say, and Frodo recognizes that, and Sam is just consumed with the fact that he's a threat to them. He's not concerned for Gollum. He's only concerned for them, which is fair. It's so fair, but it is true that he doesn't treat him quite right.
Well, and it's not even quite right. Like, and maybe to me it just seems more dramatic, but I remember watching the movie being like, dang, Sam is, like, really awful to Gollum. And trust me, I do not like Gollum. And I'm not saying that what Sam is saying is wrong, like, not wrong on a moral level, but wrong, like, okay, yeah, Gollum is, like, disgusting, and he does horrible things. But when I read the book, I was expecting for it to be so much better. Like, okay, I think the movie was, like, over dramatic and, like, took this and ran with it. And then I read the book and I was like, oh my gosh, he's even worse. Like, there's a difference between being suspicious of someone and saying, like, hey, I'm suspicious of you to their face, or telling, like, Frodo, someone nearby, I'm suspicious of him, and hey, you seem to be not a really good person, and then constantly making comments, like, almost for your own enjoyment and entertainment. Like, he was just continually, all he could say to Gollum was horribleness.
But it's strange that Frodo would be so good to Gollum when Frodo's the one who had the harsh side, especially to Sam. But then Frodo might not have if it weren't for Gandalf.
Wait, I've never noticed Frodo having a harsh side to Sam.
Maybe it's more blunt than harsh.
Okay, yeah.
I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head.
Well, it's like when Frodo fell down into the cavern thing, and Sam was on top. But even that's understandable. I mean, he was stuck in a ledge.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam was going on and on instead of actually helping him out.
I remember.
Maybe we should get into favorite quotes, because we're going to end this at like 2 hours if we don't start now. I will start. This is a quote from Gandalf. The wise speak only of what they know.
Is that why you don't speak very much? Because you're wise?
I probably not, but I hope so. This one's also from Gandalf on a similar topic. I was talking aloud to myself. A habit of the old. They choose the wisest person present to speak to.
Mine is Legolas describing from afar the Huorns moving. He says, it is as if the twilight under endless trees were flowing downwards from the hills.
I actually don't have too many quotes, but the ones I have are super long, so let me go into paragraph number 1. Then I gave him a last choice. Oh, and this is Gandalf talking about Sauron after the confrontation.
Do you mean
in the
Saruman?
tower. Saruman. I always get those confused. Then I gave him a last choice, and a fair one, to renounce both Mordor and his private schemes, and make amends by helping us in our need. He knows our need, none better. Great service he could have rendered, but he has chosen to withhold it and keep the power of Orthanc. Am I saying that right?
Probably.
Okay. He will not serve, only command. He lives now in terror of the shadow of Mordor, and yet he still dreams of riding the storm. What will become of him, I cannot say. I grieve that so much that was good now festers in the tower. Still for us, things have not gone badly. Strange are the runs of fortune. Often does hatred hurt itself.
This is from Treebeard. We do not say anything unless it is worth taking a long time to say and to listen to.
Yes, I love the ents. After all, he never had any real hope in the affair from the beginning. But being a cheerful hobbit, he had not needed hope as long as despair could be postponed. That's Sam. I just thought it was funny.
This is some banter between Merry and Gandalf.
Oh, that's my favorite.
This is Merry speaking. Thank you, said Merry, but it is a great honor to dangle at your tail, Gandalf. For one thing, in that position, one has a chance of putting a question a second time. Are we riding far tonight? Gandalf laughed. A most unquenchable hobbit. All wizards should have a hobbit or two in their care, to teach them the meaning of the word, and to correct them. Again, this is Merry. Nothing or a double helping is your way, said Merry. I am afraid I was not looking beyond tonight's bed. Where and what are Helm's Deep and all the rest of it? I don't know anything about this country. Then you'd best learn something if you wish to understand what is happening. But not just now, and not from me. I have too many pressing things to think about. All right, I'll tackle Strider by the campfire. He's less testy. I can't read today.
I have one very similar to that. What more do you want to know, Gandalf said. The name of all the stars and of all living things, and the history of all Middle-earth, and over heaven, and of the sundering seas, laughed Pippin. Of course, what else?
Okay, to balance out all y'all's funny quotes, here is a description of when they get to the lands before Mordor. And if you're questioning why that's one of my favorite quotes, it's because it's just so vivid, and I don't know why it's my favorite quote, but it is. So there. Okay. Even to the mirror of dead faces, some haggard phantom of green spring would come. But here neither spring nor summer would ever come again. Here nothing lived, not even the leprous growths that feed on rottenness. The gasping pools were choked with ash and crawling muds, sickly white and gray, as if the mountains had vomited the filth of their entrails upon the lands about. High mounds of crushed and powdered rock, great cones of earth fire-blasted and poison-stained, stood like an obscene graveyard in endless rows, slowly revealed in the reluctant light. They had come to the desolation that lay before Mordor, the lasting monument to the dark labor of its slaves that should endure when all their purposes were made void, a land defiled, diseased beyond all healing, unless the great sea should enter in and wash it with oblivion.
So, funny story, you just stole my last quote.
Wait, that was your last quote? I thought that was so random that I picked that.
I thought it was super random too. And actually, out of all the descriptions in the book, this one stood out to me the most as the most vivid. And it's so gross and perfect. And I just needed to include a description of how vivid Tolkien is in his writing. So you did a great job picking that out and thinking like me.
That one really makes you think, Isengard really was a fraction of Mordor. But, yeah. Here's another funny one. You almost felt you liked the forest. That's good. That's uncommonly kind of you, said a strange voice. Turn around and let me have a look at your faces. I almost feel that I dislike you both, but do not let us be hasty.
I love that one so much. That's one of my favorite lines. And that's Treebeard, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only other quote I wrote down was Faramir saying, "The praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards."
Nice.
You got any more funny ones to send us out on, Isaac?
No, I have a proverb.
Oh, lovely.
Aragorn said, One who cannot cast aside treasures in need is in fetters. And that was when Pippin, or was it Merry? Someone lost their elven leaf thing.
Yeah, it was Pippin. Well, they purposefully lost it so they could track them.
Right.
I love how many proverbs there are in the book and how some of them are like super good advice and some of them are like very specific to Middle Earth, like do not meddle in the affairs of wizards for they are subtle and quick to anger.
That doesn't apply to the real world.
All right. Thank you so much, Isaac, for doing this with us and for putting up with everything that you put up with. Including the technical issues. Everyone, thank you for listening to the 20th episode of the Two Retired Homeschoolers podcast. Please join us again 3 weeks from now for The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery.